Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's installment of Voices in Digital Theology, sponsored by the Global Network for Digital Theology. My name is Catherine Schmidt. I'm Assistant Professor of Theology at Molloy College in New York. And with me is my co-host, Jonas Krolberg. Hi, Jonas.
Hi, good to see you.
So today we are very excited to be talking robots. We're talking about artificial intelligence and the theology of artificial intelligence. And we have Erin Green with us. So Jonas, do you want to tell us a little bit about Erin?
Well, indeed. Good to see you both. Erin Green has a PhD from University of Toronto, and that is within the area of theology and artificial intelligence, and that's why she's with us today. She has, over the last few years, she's been working for the European Council of Churches, and more recently with Pax Christi, which is a Catholic international peace movement. Last time I heard Erin speak, she delivered a paper on coded conflict, and that was about theological resistance to robotized war. So there you go. It's really good to have you with us. We would love to hear a bit about your background and what triggered your interest into this area of theology and artificial intelligence.
Super. Thank you so much for having me. This is really nice to have a chance to talk about my research. So my background, I went off to university, and for my undergrad, I studied computational chemistry and math. So my first training was in the sciences, and I think, especially because I was into computational chemistry, which is all done on a computer, I was really kind of in tune with the power of algorithms and computation to solve really difficult problems. So that was kind of my first foray into the power of artificial intelligence. But I think what was really missing for me in that was kind of the more human element. I was very much involved in the chapel community, and my faith was always really important to me. And I really missed in the kind of world of computational chemistry some of the things that I felt were really important to my vocation. So I eventually went off to grad school and made a switch to theology. And that was part by chance and part by choice. And what I found when I started studying theology was really this wonderful opportunity for creativity. And I was really surprised because as I got to study more and more theology and get to know the other departments at the university, I realized that academically theology was a lot more flexible than other disciplines. Like, for example, I remember my experience in the Department of Philosophy was very dogmatic, and you had to do things like, you know, they were more inflexible about their own traditions, and you had to follow in this lineage and read this canon and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, I was really expecting that more from the theologians.
That's right.
Yeah, so I found I felt really at home with the methodology of theology. And when I proposed my research topic, it was mostly no problem to study artificial intelligence. They're like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
So if you want, I can tell you a bit about how I came to study robots and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, how did you go from sort of, general theology or sort of getting the basics of theology to something, so specific, I guess? Yeah.
Well, I will admit that part of it is laziness. Because you know what it's like when you pick a doctoral topic, they want you to read like everything that has been written about that topic.
Yeah.
And it turns out not that much has been written about artificial intelligence.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I did not do the exact same thing.
Did you? What happened was I was in grad school and I kept horrible grad student hours, and I was always watching The Daily Show, and P.W. Singer came on, and he was stumping his new book, Wired for War. And that's how I heard about it. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of into theology and technology and all that kind of stuff. And I picked up that book.
Cool.
And I remember reading it. And it was the kind of book that, it's a once in a lifetime kind of read that just totally changes the way you see the world, the way you think about things, the way that you kind of understand how people relate and what the future could be like. And so after I read Wired for War, I went looking for theological resources on robots and AI. And I found that there was almost nothing. Like, I was shocked. I'm like, how is no one talking about this? This is cool and it is scary. And so that's when I thought, okay, this is it. This is my ticket. It kind of checks all the boxes. There's just enough to make it a viable project. And it's also really cutting edge research that is manageable, because you need something manageable, right, for just a dissertation project.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of got into it. And then once I went down the rabbit hole, you know, I haven't stopped falling. I'm still going.
Nice. Can you give us a sense of kind of how we should think theologically about this topic? So what's our major sort of, what do you work with in terms of your major theological concepts or the approach that you have when you think about this stuff theologically?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with something like robots, especially if you're looking at humanoid robots, you can approach it from so many different angles, right? Like, it kind of touches on everything.
Right.
It touches on, you know, community, it touches on justice, it touches on, you know, theological anthropology, anything. So I certainly think there's a lot of ways into it. But I kind of have two basic ways that I like to think about artificial intelligence from a theological perspective. One is that I really think that we should see it as a continuous rather than a discontinuous phenomenon. So certainly there's a lot of like apocalyptic thinking about artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of, you know, in science fiction, we see a lot of it. It's a lot of speculation. And I think theologians are very easily captivated by that, because, I mean, who isn't, right? But I think what's really important is that if you look at the current state of affairs, what you see is actually much more realistically described as like a revolution in computation. It's not a total radical cleaving of history where we've created an other, and you know, I think it can be very easily exaggerated. And so then you have speculation arguing against speculation. So in my own research, I find this important because what that does as far as methodology is it prompts us to use existing theological resources. So for me, for example, it's really important to look at what's already existing in the theological tradition that can help us respond to these challenges. So for example, one of the things that you see so much about right now is what they call algorithmic bias. And so that's the problems of, you know, racism, misogyny, you know, these kind of issues, homophobia in a lot of the technologies. But these are not new phenomenon, right? Like, these are not new and just all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we have racist technology. Where did that come from? You know? So I think what's really interesting is if you look at the technology the way it really is, then you can use theology that has already responded to corresponding phenomenon in human thought and human history. So for example, there's a phenomenal tradition within liberation theology, womanist theology, Black thinkers, for example, that are very well equipped to provide this theological critique of the same phenomena in AI. So I think that's really important.
So could you give us, so could you just give us some examples of what that might look like then? You know, how do you use these theological resources to reflect on artificial intelligence?
So my big thing is embodiment. That's really where I see a failure in both AI and theological reflection on it, is to deal with embodiment. And so what I really like to do is to turn to eco-theology, because I think eco-theology has done a great job of addressing not just not just embodiment, but the anthropocentrism that we often think about when we think about bodies. And so what I do, for example, is if I'm looking at artificial intelligence, I see a lot of implicit assumptions about embodiment. So typically the body that's assumed in artificial intelligence is one that's very much like mine, or maybe like very much like mine, but a male version. And so what you can do is you can look to eco-theology to kind of see this different image of embodiment and use that to critique the AI. And so that's a big part of my research, is to kind of look at eco-theology and apply it to the context of AI.
Why eco-theology and not, like you mentioned, womanist or feminist theology? I'm intrigued that eco-theology is the thing that stands out for you in terms of embodiment.
Well, I have two reasons for that. One is personal. I think the ecological crisis is hugely important. I'm a vegetarian. I ride a bike everywhere. It's from the thrift store, you know the type. So personally, it's very important to me. And that's like a value that I bring to everything that I do. I think it's really it's really disheartening to see what is happening in the world, and to watch this climate change, and to watch the catastrophe kind of unfold and continue to get worse without significant political will to do something different. So that's one of the reasons. But the other reason is that I think when you look at applications of artificial intelligence, what you see is it's actually a huge accelerant to a lot of the things that contribute to climate change. So if you look at artificial intelligence in consumerism, AI is deployed everywhere to get people to consume, to buy, to shop, to kind of hold up this system of Western style consumption that's simply unsustainable. And you also see it, for example, a lot of resource extraction companies are using robotics and artificial intelligence to accelerate resource extraction. And so for me, there's actually really a close relationship between these technologies and eco-theology. Yeah. So I think it's actually really well poised to kind of fit together in that way.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that there isn't a natural relationship. I was just wondering in terms of, the theologies that come to mind that really resonate, the theological implications of having a body in the world, and I think that, perhaps my question is unfair in terms of, I think eco-theology and things like feminist and womanist theology are very, they get along very well, to say the least. So, yeah.
And I think it's also important too to look at eco-theology, because increasingly in artificial intelligence, you see intelligences that are quite unlike human intelligences. And you also see more and more in military applications that they're looking towards other animals as inspiration. So like swarm behavior, and like how bees kind of navigate together, or bee colony works, these kind of things. These are also sources of inspiration for these military applications. So you see that the roboticists and the AI researchers think quite expansively in some ways about embodiment that also maps well to eco-theological critique.
So Erin, maybe we can have to take a little bit step back here, because I think for most people, they have already a conception of what artificial intelligence is. So, it might just be helpful for this conversation to if you could explain to us how we should think about artificial intelligence to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. That was a great opening question. I mean, that's a tough question. It's because for a few reasons. One, it's a moving target. So anytime we develop something that's an AI or a success in AI, once we get used to it, it's no longer AI, it's just software. Like when I was in university, like 15, 20 years ago, when Google first came out, that was amazing, right? That was like, woo, in my mind. And now we're quite used to it, and we don't really think of Google search as AI. So it's a moving target. The other problem is that among AI researchers themselves, you see a lot of debate about this, right? So anytime there's some kind of significant advance, like in a chatbot, for example, that's often hotly debated, you'll see a flurry of think pieces around. Oh, it was also about Go, that game where the computer beat the human Go player. There was a lot of debate about whether or not that is AI. And of course, competing researchers kind of want to deny the claims of the successes of other researchers and this kind of thing. And then also too, there's like competing standards for the success of AI. So does it just need to appear to be a human-like intelligence, or does it actually need to fully replicate it? So I tend to be pretty pragmatic about it. I think that if if you have the impression that it does, the perception that it's an intelligence, I think then you should label it as an artificial intelligence, because that's how people respond to things, right? Like there's lots of research that shows people will experience feelings of empathy or sorrow if you're unkind to a robotic toy and this kind of stuff. So I think people very easily ascribe human-like qualities to other things. And so I think that should be a starting point.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think that goes to your point about the continuous and the discontinuous. You know, I think that is having such an expansive definition, which I am very I'm very prone to have the same kinds of definitions when it comes to like technology and virtual reality and things like that. It makes me think of this. I don't know if you've ever seen these, like, gosh, I don't know what century, maybe 15th century. Someone in response to his son being healed, this inventor built this mechanical monk that walked by itself, you know, and it was like sort of like this very early robot. And so it's really making me think more broadly about that, you know, that perhaps we could understand that as a kind of artificial intelligence. But is that too broad, do you think? Do you think that there's like am I taking it too far? Like, do we need some sort of computational, you know, I know nothing about computational anything, so.
Well, so basically there are 3 ways to define AI at 3 different levels.
Okay.
So one is really just to look at the products, right? The results. Is this AI or is this not AI? And that's the narrowest. And then the next level up is to look at it as the computational techniques that get you there. So, you know, the computer science, the software engineering, the math, the data science, all of that. That kind of encompasses all of that plus the results. And where I like to sit is in the 3rd way, and that's kind of the top, the biggest layer. And that's to look at AI as a discipline or as an area of inquiry itself. And that takes into account methodology, which I think is hugely important. And I also think it honors the fact that AI research from its beginning has always been interdisciplinary. It's always drawn on sociology, you know, cognitive science, psychology, developmental learning, and so on. And now, if you think really expansively in that way about it, it also makes room for ethics, for philosophy, for all of the debates about law and regulation, theologians, for example. And so when I say artificial intelligence, I would almost always encourage us to think really expansively up at that level about it. Because otherwise, I think you just get mired in these debates about whether or not Watson is AI or this or that is this AI. And I think you will never really converge on something. And I think it's a good way for theologians to kind of elbow their ways in there.
Yeah, right. That's true.
That's my compelling argument.
Yeah, I like it. So you mentioned before apocalypticism, you know, and I think that, like, yeah, I mean, I think not only are theologians susceptible, I think we are particularly susceptible to this. So can you give us some examples of ways of approaching this topic that you find to be kind of problematic or frustrating for you? You know, it seems to me that you're giving to theology a kind of like a very sophisticated account of artificial technology or artificial intelligence. What has frustrated you over the years of looking at this?
It's not with the apocalypticism, truthfully.
Okay.
Yeah, I find what's more frustrating is that people just kind of assume that there is such thing as an average human and then kind of apply that to everything. But if we look at the apocalypticism, what I find really interesting is that the scientists are equally as guilty of it. And that this is not something that the theologians have kind of come up with on their own, right? Like there's always these kind of teleological myths and these kind of fantastic ideas about it. And you see that all the way from back into the classic Greek mythology about artificial others and so on. You see this everywhere. And one of the best examples of this that I studied in my schooling was Hans Moravec. So Hans Moravec, as far as I know, builds warehouse robots, you know, and like industrial robots. And he was really a pioneer in the field and worked a lot on robotic vision. But if you would read his books, he wrote one called Mind and one called, I can't remember, Mind Children and something else. I can't remember. Oh, it's embarrassing. Anyway, if you would read Hans Moravec, his books read like darts thrown at a dartboard. You know what I mean? Just like, this is the future. It's just, my guess is as good as anyone else's. And he came up with like all of these graphs and charts that, I mean, these are just pure speculation, right? Like, it's just, he says, you know, a human fits in line with a whale and then a monkey and then a human and then a robot. And then all of a sudden we'll have this mind that transcends all else and will break free from our embodiment. And like, this is not within the purview of a computer scientist to say this stuff, right? Like, this is pure speculation as well. So I think what is wonderful actually is that there's really good theological critique of this. And it's using the language of apocalypticism to call what's at work in Moravec's work what it is, you know? And so I actually see really great creative work. Do either of you know Robert Gerasi? Gerasi, is that his name? Gerasi? No, he has written a lot about apocalypticism and artificial intelligence, and he critiques Hans Moravec, and I think he does a wonderful job of it, using these theological categories to shed light on what's happening in robotics.
Very cool. Yeah.
So I guess the question that we all have is should we be afraid?
Oh, let me take a drink. It's water. It's just water.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But if you weren't already afraid, what were you doing? Right? Like, yeah, I mean, the thing is that fundamentally, I see artificial intelligence as an accelerant. So anything good or bad or neutral or creative or awful that you see in humanity and in human society, robots will amplify it and artificial intelligence will amplify it, right? Like, I think this is clear. So I think if you want to look, for example, at the United States, I think it's well documented that racial profiling and policing is a huge issue, and facial recognition technologies will simply amplify it.
Yeah. Right.
I think that's how I see it, is that whatever you can find in humanity, you will find, you know, 10-fold or 100-fold in artificial intelligence. So I think it's our job as theologians to nudge it as much as we possibly can and to critique it quite sharply, so that we end up magnifying the good.
I think one of the most difficult things for us as theologians in that, because I think you're absolutely right about our job as critique, but I think especially in my own context in the United States, it's sort of, the question is like, well, who's going to listen to our critique, you know, because there's this, it's such a dominant feeling that data is neutral. And so in something like, you know, just culturally it's dominant. And, you know, there's like the debates we're having right now about predictive policing. So not even just facial stuff, but just, you know, figuring out which part of the city, you know, has more crime, and, you know, just this overarching, you know, belief, really it's a belief that data is somehow neutral, and I just put data into the system, and you know, so I just wonder who's going to listen to theologians. Like, are you optimistic that people will listen to our critique?
Yeah, actually I am. I don't know if that's naive or not, but yeah. I mean, certainly, okay, I do a lot of like very small things that make me feel good about myself. Like during the pandemic here in Belgium, they were using cell phone data to see if people were following the rules, like the lockdown rules. And so I just left my phone at home all the time. Like, don't track me. Yeah. You know, so I think you can resist in small ways. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean, but you can. Yeah. But the other thing is that I have had some professional success in influencing dialogue. And one good example I can give you is that when I was working for the Conference of European Churches, we were invited along with other civil society organizations to comment on the AI guidelines for trustworthy AI. And so I drafted that response. And one of the critiques that I made was that throughout the document, they only referenced human intelligence, and there was no reference to ecological impact of these technologies, which, as I just discussed, is really important to me.
Yeah.
And so I drafted this whole response, and it was one of 500 that was submitted. So I don't know what was in the others, but in the final version, they did pick up that suggestion.
Nice.
And so that is something that will be used to develop AI legislation in the EU. And that's actually quite powerful, right? Because the EU is really trying to become the referee for a lot of artificial intelligence technologies. And you can see with GDPR legislation that actually has a far-reaching approach.
Yeah.
So I think if you know where to go and have effective pathways to the power, I think it can make a difference. Yeah. And I can see the way that we've been chipping away at it here and there. And I also think it's important too that it's impossible for us to know what the world would be like if we didn't offer this critique, right? So it feels really difficult. A lot of the times lobbying and advocacy work is really just, it can feel exhausting. You don't know if you're making a difference. But a lot of the work might just be to maintain a status quo, right? Or you don't know what it would look like in the absence of those efforts. Yeah. So certainly I think it's valuable work.
Yeah, well said.
Amazing. So one of the things that we are interested in exploring in this series of interviews is to, think about what the relationship between digital theology and kind of mainstream academic theology might be. And so we'd like to hear if you have any thoughts about that. And
yeah, I mean, my take on it is that academic theology and academics in general is really, really going through a difficult moment. I think it's especially difficult for people in the humanities where the profitability of our research is not so obvious. I've really noticed even in the 10 or 15 years since I started grad school that there's a big movement towards commercial viability of research. I've seen job postings where you're expected to fundraise your own salary. I've also seen a huge shift away from secured tenured positions towards grad students and adjuncts. And so I think it's a massive crisis in academics in general, and particularly in fields like ours. So I think where digital theology really can make such a contribution is through the methodology. So one of the things that I've always really valued about digital theology is that there's just this wonderful flexibility about methodology that I think needs to be better rehearsed elsewhere in academics. You know, for example, when I was doing my research, I was citing like YouTube videos and newspaper articles and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of pushback. It's like, well, where's the peer reviewed stuff? And I'm like, it's a robot, you know, like you can't peer review a robot. Like, look at this picture. But I think what digital theology has done is to kind of crack open that methodology a little bit and to kind of make it a little bit more of a democratic space and not make it so beholden to this structure that is kind of crumbling anyway. You know, one of the things that happened to me recently is I had an article published, and to make it open source, I would have had to contribute almost a month of my salary. That was the cost to make it open source. Yeah. Right. And I think which I would have loved to do, but I also like feeding my children. You know, it's the impossible choice. Yeah. So I just feel like what digital theology done has paved the way and said, like, look, this is legitimate communal discernment that happens in a way that's accessible and democratic, and that it is equally theological reasoning. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as the academic model falls apart, I think theology really has a lot to offer, and digital theology really has a lot to offer. So for me, that's the really significant contribution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So do you feel like people have become more open in recent years to your kind of research? Like I feel like people are starting to see, oh, this is actually a viable theological topic, whereas a few years ago they gave us a lot of grief, right?
So I proposed my topic in 2012. So 8 years ago, so not that long ago for theology, especially, right?
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there and one of the committee members said, I don't see what the point of this project is, but if he says it's okay, it's fine. I was like, wow, that's great.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And at my defense, that same professor said to me, I get it now. I get it now. So definitely, I think really we're at a tipping point. So even when I started, there really wasn't very much out there, but now it's more and more coming along, and you're seeing more and more postdocs available in this area, and more people are touching on it. But I have to say, one of the things I still find disappointing is that people are not engaging with what is already out there. So for example, the Toronto Journal of Theology just had a special edition on AI. And I don't think any of the contributions mentioned Noreen Hertzfeld or Anne First, who were really pioneers in the field and already have monographs out and have already contributed to the development of this. And so you're still seeing this really kind of siloed approach to it, and it seems that anyone with an opinion about it is writing about it because it's a little bit of a hot topic.
Yeah.
And I find that a bit disappointing.
Yeah.
So I would really like, yeah, go ahead.
I think that'd be true as well for kind of, a lot of theologians now are jumping on thinking about, online church, and, there's already a wealth of resources there,
Right.
Yeah.
So have you spent the last 7 months of your life really annoyed?
No, not really.
No,
not really.
okay.
I mean, this is our moment, in some ways. So it's more like, I haven't been in digital theology so long, but for those who have, it's more like, well, we told you so. This is important.
I know. I was online waiting. Yeah, I know. So I find that a little bit frustrating too, especially since the pioneers in this field, like I said, Noreen Hertzfeld and Anne First were women, and a lot of the scholarship is just not acknowledging that. And I'm just like, come on, Anyway, so we'll see. So I would like more kind of discussion rather than just all these one-off journal articles a little bit, and to kind of turn it into, a sub area of the overall science and religion dialogue. That would be cool. And I think that will come. It takes a while to kind of get these things going. So
yeah. Well, I think this was a wonderful contribution to that very project about kind of putting out academic work that's a little bit more digital than analog, maybe. So thank you so much, Erin. I think this was great, and we really look forward to the rest of your work, because I think it's so important, and it's so good. So really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much. Yeah.